My name is Andrew, and I'm a senior consultant with ScaleNorth. And today would be discussing useful general preferences. They can be configured by the administrator, which I am logged in as, or a role that has permission to general preferences. To set these up, navigate to Setup, then Company, then General Preferences. So NetSuite has numerous general preferences, and we won't be tackling all of them as some are straightforward as the time and date and number format settings. So for this session, I'll be going through the preferences that can be configured that can ease the use of NetSuite users. So firstly would be the use, going down a bit. So use last name first for employees. So checking this box lists the employee's last name and lists in NetSuite, as well as for tax and payroll related records. So this affects the name field of the employee record when being used in CSV importing. The next preference has also the same function as the use last name first for employees. So this is the use last name for entities this time, and what it affects is contacts, customers, partners, and vendor records. So this would only affect records that have been created after this preference is set, and if the record was created as an individual type. So if there has been a change to these preferences, a mass update is needed to be done for pre-existing entity records. Pre-populate contact address. So what it does is that when enabled, this automatically fills in the address fields of the contact records created from a custom record. So it copies, if there's already an address set in the customer record, the address fields in the contact record will automatically copy it. Next is show display name with item codes. So this affects all the item records. And what it does is that when selected items in transactions and records would also show both item name and display code if populated. Then going down to the password related preferences. So password policy is first. So this has 3 settings for password validation. So these policies enforce length and content requirements for password. So the 3 ones are strong, medium, and weak. So the strong setting would need a minimum length of 10 characters and at least 3 of 4 character type combinations from uppercase letters, lowercase letters, numbers, and special characters. Medium would lower the minimum length to 8 characters and only 2 of the 4 type combinations. Weak, which is not recommended, as also displayed by NetSuite, would only need 6 characters and no character type enforcement at all. So for the minimum password length, this is affected by the default set minimum password, or rather the password policy that's set. So if strong is selected, the default minimum password length should be 10. If it's set to lower, then NetSuite would have, when trying to save the general preferences, NetSuite would have a warning that you would need to have a minimum length of 10. Then going to password expiration in days. This sets the number of days before a password expires for all users, and the valid values are ranged from 1 to 365. So this should be set up as per the company policy for account security. Idle session timeout in minutes. So sets the number of minutes before a user interface session, meaning the person logged in, expires, can be idle before getting locked out of NetSuite. So by default, it's set to 180 minutes. And the minimum value is 15. The maximum would be 720. Allow free-form states and addresses. When this preference is enabled, the state province field is a free-form text field. So you can type anything in this field and it won't be converted into a state or province identifier. The text that would be entered would be stored on the record or transaction. So if it's disabled, the state or province field would become a dropdown from when you choose where you can choose standard US states and Canadian provinces. So any text that has been entered here would be converted to standard state or province identifiers. So this also affects this next preference, which is called use state abbreviations and addresses. So this affects the state province field on entity records, location records, and transactions. It also affects the search fields on entity, location, and transaction searches based on addresses. So going to performance-related preferences, the first one would be the delay loading of sublists. So what it does is that it would delay loading of data on subtabs for records until opening the specific subtab. So this helps out in decreasing the page load times. Going up a bit. So number of rows in list segments sets the number of records displayed in the list. Setting this to a lower value speeds up the loading time of list pages and searches. Maximum entries in dropdowns sets the number of records that would appear in dropdown related fields, and the highest number that can be set is 500. This also affects the load times of dropdown related fields. So setting this to 0 would change the dropdown field to a type ahead field, and the user can pop out the list instead. Log system notes on update only will only log changes to a record in the system notes tab. This allows server storage settings and some performance improvements, as this does not log the creation of a record in the system notes. Show quick add row on lists allows the quick add of new records with basic information on direct editable enabled lists. Show list when only one result. So once this is enabled, this would affect search results and show the record as a list, even if there's only one record. If disabled, NetSuite drills down to the single record by default. Then going down to the business process preferences, depending on how they record entities. So these have all the same functions: default customer type, default lead type, default vendor type, and default partner type. For general preferences, they can be set as individual or company. So if they are individual type of entity records, you can enter in a first, middle name, and last name fields as well as their titles. And if it's set to a company, they would be set as a company type in which you can create contact records under them. So going down, auto name customers is a preference that sets the auto box on customer records to be checked by default so that the customer ID field copies the entered customer name. If this is not checked, the ID field would be a free-form text field in which users can enter in. Then hide attachment folders. So this would hide the parent attachment folders to users and will only be available to administrators. The folders are the attachment received, attachment sent, and mail merge folders. So this is more of control or administrator settings and would provide more security restrictions to the account for custom roles. So going down, email employee on approvals will automatically send email messages to employee records with supervisors set once their purchase, expense reports, and time transactions are approved. Scrolling down a bit, that affects counting. So time selectors use fiscal calendars based on first month. So what this does is that it sets the fiscal year date range based on the fiscal month set in setup company, then company information. So for example, if the fiscal month is set to January and this preference is enabled, what it does is that the fiscal year date range would be from January, then year, to December, then same year. If this is unchecked, then it would set the fiscal year range to January 2023, for example, to January 2024. Then show transaction numbering setup. So what this does is that it displays the transaction numbering setup at setup, company, then auto-generated numbers. The transaction numbers are internal numbers that cannot be overridden once they are recorded. And this also affects global searches once enabled, as it will include the transaction number together with a document number in the search results. Next is create automatic memorized transactions as system. So what it does is that it would show system in the system notes instead of the user when a memorized transaction is created. If this is cleared, the last user who edited the memorized transaction definition would be logged instead. Then lastly, allow subsidiary hierarchy to be modified, maximum 30 days. Allows the change to the parent-child subsidiary setup and would be open by the inputted number of days. So best practice is to only have administrators or account controllers to only enable this, because once a day amount is entered in the field, this would open up the preference, and anyone who has edit permissions to subsidiaries can change the parent-child hierarchy. So this is a very important general preference to set and should be planned. And going down, there are also general preferences that custom roles can be allowed to override at the override preferences subtab. So basically, if this is checked, then the user can override all of these general preferences. And this finishes the video, and thanks for watching.